Today would have been John Lennon's 70th birthday, so Imagine is a fitting tribute. I'm Laurie Gaylor, and welcome to Freethought Radio.
And I'm Dan Barker, your friendly neighborhood atheist. John Lennon's birthday was October the 9th, and this is the weekend of October 9th and 10th, 2010.
And we're here in the studio also with Brian Trevani, our engineer-producer. You want to say hello, Brian?
Hello, Brian.
Freethought Radio is broadcasting and streaming from the Progressive Talk, the Mic 92.1, Madison, Wisconsin, airing also in Atlanta, Anchorage, Grand Rapids, Monterey, and podcasting everywhere.
This show, Freethought Radio, is the weekly production of the National Freedom from Religion Foundation. We, of course, are in favor of freedom for and freedom of religion, but our group is composed of atheists and agnostics and other types of non-believers who think it's very important to keep religion and government separate. So we educate and we broadcast and we litigate.
And we'll be talking about some of that litigation later. We have the pleasure of an in-studio guest today, Mike Konopacki. He'll be joining us on the second half of Freethought Radio. Mike is a Madison institution. He's been drawing labor cartoons since 1978 and, of course, cartooned for the Capital Times, formerly the afternoon newspaper, for many years.
Mike will be speaking and showing his powerful show, One Nation Under God, Bible History, at the Freedom from Religion Foundation's upcoming 33rd National Convention, which meets at the Concourse Hotel right here in Madison, Wisconsin. Meets the last weekend of October, Halloween weekend. Sign up. See for yourself that the Bible isn't everything you may have thought it's cracked up to be.
There's full registration information at the FFRF website, ffrf.org/outreach/convention, and there's still plenty of time to sign up.
But before we talk with Mike, there's a lot more to report about the activities of freethinkers around the country.
And for fun, let's look at the famous non-believer of the week. We want to play a short excerpt of an interview from last Sunday's CBS Sunday Morning. This is Rita Braver interviewing renowned author Philip Roth.
Do you consider yourself a religious person?
No, I don't have a religious bone in my body.
You don't? So do you feel like there's a God out there?
I'm afraid there isn't, no.
You know that telling the whole world that you don't believe in God is going to say, have people say, oh my goodness, that's a terrible thing for him to say.
When the whole world doesn't believe in God, it'll be a great place.
Isn't that interesting that instead of defending against this idea that, wow, what a horrible person you are, he just comes right out and says, boy, what a great place the world will be when none of us believe in God anymore.
Last week there was a development. Actually, there were two developments in FFRF litigation. We have 7 current state church lawsuits.
The Freedom from Religion Foundation's federal lawsuit, which was filed in July of 2009, which challenges the religiously motivated engraving of In God We Trust and the religious Pledge of Allegiance at the Capitol Visitor Center in Washington, D.C., it was dismissed, not on the merits, but it was dismissed on the lack of taxpayer standing September the 29th. It was dismissed by the newly appointed U.S. District Judge William M. Conley, the Western District of Wisconsin.
The U.S. House and Senate had passed resolutions ordering the architect of the Capitol to engrave In God We Trust and the Pledge of Allegiance prominently at the Capitol Visitor Center. And for those of you who may not have visited the Capitol recently, the Visitor Center now serves as the sole point of entry to the seat of American government. Visitors must pass through there to get into the Capitol.
Our lawsuit pointed out the religious purpose behind those engravings. The resolution passed after religious right lobbying in a crusade also widely promoted by Newt Gingrich, and after expressly religious purposes were stated by the sponsors of the bill. The Freedom from Religion Foundation sued Stephen Ayers, who was the acting architect of the Capitol. The foundation sought a judgment declaring the congressional directive violated the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment and asking for an order enjoining the prominent engraving, which has since taken place and has cost at least $100,000 or to $150,000. For instance, Senator Jim DeMint, Republican of South Carolina, the Senate sponsor of the resolution, had threatened to hold up the opening of the center in December 2008, complaining that it shortchanged the importance of religion in federal government.
And also showing the religious intent of that legislation, U.S. Representative Steve King, Republican, Iowa, claimed that without the engravings of In God We Trust and the Pledge of Allegiance, the Visitor Center would reflect an effort, quote, to scrub references to America's Christian heritage, unquote, and to eradicate, quote, the role of Christianity in America, unquote.
Representative Dan Lundgren, Republican from California, sponsored the resolution in the House of Representatives for the express purpose of emphasizing the role of religion in the U.S. government. First, here's the CBN. CBN is the Christian Broadcasting Network. That's Pat Robertson's network. Here's their take on the decision last week.
The suit filed by the Freedom from Religion Foundation challenged engravings at the Capitol Visitor Center in Washington. The American Center for Law and Justice and others had asked that the lawsuit be dismissed. ACLJ founder Jay Sekulow said this challenge was another misguided attempt to alter history and purge America of religious references. The national motto and the pledge merely echo the sentiments found in the Declaration of Independence.
So, okay, what gets me is, first of all, the ACLJ is a Christian right law firm founded by Reverend Pat Robertson. They had filed a brief against us on behalf of dozens of members of Congress asking that our lawsuit be tossed. And the ACLJ's chief counsel put out a press release, as you also heard on the broadcast, claiming we are the ones trying to alter history.
Theocrats in Congress and in this country, they are the ones trying to alter history. Representative Greg Harper, a Republican from Mississippi, he put out a press release after our case was thrown out, in which he said, numerous sources point to our founders' collective reliance on God for direction and wisdom as they drafted the United States Constitution.
And that is a big, fat lie. There was no prayer at the Constitutional Convention, and we'll talk more about that in a minute.
So the judge dismissed the taxpayer standing of the individual plaintiffs. And who would those people be, Annie Laurie? That would be me and my co-host, Annie Laurie Gaylor.
It's hard not to take it personally.
When we have been personally injured by this thing. The judge claimed that there was no clear nexus. That's a big word in taxpayer standing. Nexus. Showing that Congress had specifically authorized money for those particular engravings.
Yeah, I thought nexus had something to do with hair care until I started running into this taxpayer standing business. The Senate approved the resolution on July 6, 2009, and it was part of an express appropriation bill. So I don't get this decision by the judge. Courts are carrying to extremes this requirement that a specific congressional appropriation be passed to fund unconstitutional actions that it mandates or approves. Congress authorized the religious engravings. Congress controls the purse strings for the Capitol architect, who had to pay for the engravings out of those appropriations. How can that not show a nexus?
We contend that these engravings, quote, exclude and treat as outsiders millions of adult Americans who do not believe in a God. The mandated language diminishes non-believers by making God belief synonymous with citizenship. So are we going to appeal this dismissal?
We're considering all our options and probably refiling the case on grounds other than taxpayer standing because I'm getting tired of this fight. And if we can win on other grounds, that's what we'll do. But we'll keep you posted.
Well, either way, we could still forge ahead with this. And that brings us to our next news, which is the Freedom from Religion Foundation just filed our very feisty and complete response brief opposing the Obama administration's request to overturn our historic federal victory declaring the National Day of Prayer unconstitutional.
Okay, and so we'll quickly, it was a lot of work. The brief was written by FFRF litigation attorney Richard L. Bolton, but Dan and I and our attorneys, staff attorneys, and some of our interns all had some work in the process, too.
So it's a fascinating brief, if we may say so ourselves. Next week, we'll have full news on the Friend of the Court briefs filed in our favor, and which we're very grateful for, but they will include an amicus brief filed by Americans United and co-signed by the ACLU.
And, of course, you can read FFRF's brief online. You can read all the legal documents. They're up at the legal link at ffrf.org. But we'd like to talk briefly about some of the points in the brief.
You remember that Federal Judge Barbara Crabb's historic...
Oh, that was a pun.
point out in the brief?
Briefly.
It's your week for jokes, right? I usually tell a joke, but yours are better. Judge Crabb, her historic April 15th ruling, declared that the National Day of Prayer is unconstitutional and enjoined the President from issuing the proclamation pending the appeal. Crabb wrote that the National Day of Prayer's sole purpose is to encourage all citizens to engage in prayer, which is an inherently religious exercise that serves no secular function in this context. In this instance, the government has taken sides on a matter that must be left to individual conscience.
We noted in the FFRF brief that the presidential proclamation is as much a summons to prayer as the adhan that calls Muslims to prayer 5 times a day, and more powerful because it comes from the highest executive office. The brief recaps the religious history and purpose of the National Day of Prayer. On April 17, 1952, following Reverend Billy Graham's lobbying for an annual presidential prayer proclamation during his Christian crusade at the Capitol, Congress passed Public Law 82-324,
which reads, "The President shall set aside and proclaim a suitable day each year, other than a Sunday, as a national day of prayer, on which the people of the United States may turn to God in prayer and meditation at churches, groups, and as individuals."
And note the turn to God, and note the reference to churches.
Who is this God that we're supposed to turn to?
And then their openly religious motives included instilling a faith in Almighty God and reaffirming in a dramatic manner the deep religious conviction which has prevailed throughout the history of the United States. That's in the congressional records. And then they also said the reason that they were passing a National Day of Prayer was because our founders prayed at the Constitutional Convention, that old lie, which we have thoroughly debunked. And then in 88, following lobbying by the Campus Crusade for Christ and other members of the National Prayer Committee, Congress changed what was a floating date to a fixed date, the first Thursday in May. It was the same language. And, of course, we are contending that it's illegal and inappropriate for our President and Congress to exhort all citizens to turn to God in prayer, and that these references show a Christian bias. And if you want to read more about it, there's a great deal of interesting history that we debunk in this brief. Just go to our website.
We also point out that a lot less people believe in prayer than used to back in those years. I'm Dan Barker with Annie Laurie Gaylor, and this is Freethought Radio.